Hello and welcome to Creation or Evolution, Catholicism and the Question of Origins. Today we're going to do a deep dive. This is going to be some serious stuff, so I hope you're ready. We're going to be talking about Thomas Aquinas, as in Saint Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval philosopher, theologian, father and doctor of the church. And we're going to be talking specifically about the question of whether Aquinas is compatible with evolutionary theory. So our guest, Father Michael Chaberek, is with us again. Now, Father, you actually wrote a book entitled Aquinas and Evolution. I read the book. It was delightful. Took me a while to get through it, but I persisted, knowing that it would be a great payoff at the end, and it was. In the book, your thesis is essentially that St. Thomas Aquinas and his teaching is not, in fact, compatible with evolutionary theory. And of course, in the Catholic world, there are two points of view on this. There are certainly those that say that Thomas Aquinas and his teaching is, in fact, compatible with evolutionary theory. So did I read that correctly? Did I do my homework well? Your thesis is no, he is not.
Yes, that's right. I would only add that this is about biological macroevolution again. So we are not talking about minor changes within organisms, but more like the origin of new species. And in this case, we understand species as new forms of life, or new natural species, or entirely new forms of life. So that would be the correct understanding of evolution in this context.
Okay, good. So I think we'll just begin with the arguments that you present in the book. There's essentially five. Let's kind of take those piece by piece. We'll go slowly, and I'll probably interrupt you periodically to ask for definitions, since when we're dealing with the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, we're dealing with a very gifted thinker. And so we may have to downshift some of his language and some of his concepts for viewers like myself.
Okay, yeah, indeed. I present five arguments, and I think we could call them metaphysical arguments. So metaphysics is a science of being, and it already sounds kind of strange, abstract. Being is everything that exists, and metaphysics is a philosophical discipline which was pursued by Aristotle and applied by Aquinas to understand Catholic faith, Catholic dogma. So philosophical principles of Aristotle that Thomas Aquinas takes and provides, we could say, rational explanation to what we believe.
And the word metaphysics itself means something like beyond or above the physical or material.
Exactly.
Okay.
So in physics, we deal with particular structures in the universe, but in metaphysics, we deal with the universe on a very abstract level. So we take we understand it as a being, as a whole. There is a lot of, many principles of metaphysics. So yeah, I would say that one of the main arguments that we propose, and I think Aquinas would be clear about it, is that in evolutionary theory you see that something more emerges from something lesser, bigger from lesser, greater from smaller. And this argument has been proposed by many critics of evolution over time, but in this case I propose it in a metaphysical sense, Thomistic sense. Obviously, Thomas Aquinas adopts this, we could say, common sense principle. It's no-brainer that you can get more from less or greater from smaller without any additional cost that would actually be greater than the effect. So the cost cannot be smaller than the effect. What you see in evolution, at least precisely according to the evolutionists, you see organisms that are simpler, and they are simpler in terms of their biology, so they're less complex. They have less organs, less functions, or fewer functions, fewer organs, and basically a single-cell organism is supposed to be transformed into a complex organism, like a human body or animal body, like mammalian body, which has additional systems and organs and systems of organs and everything. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. Now, Thomistic evolutionists, if we can coin such term or put them in one category, would typically say, well, this is possible because there is a number of causes working in evolution. So you can actually, perhaps you couldn't get a bird from a reptile, just by not random variation, natural selection, but there is a number of other causes. So selective pressures, some maybe some genetic flow in the populations. Then they would say that this number of causes would supply for the lack of one efficient cause. And my response to it is that it is not really about how many causes you have, but whether the cause you have is apt to produce the effect. So, for instance, you may have, let's say, 10 uneducated people who have no idea about computers. They had never have anything to do with computer sciences, and you ask them to write some advanced algorithm, like a program, a computer program, let's say.
You could use me as an example of someone who has no idea about computers. So you're going to ask Steve to write an algorithm.
An algorithm. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's imagine that we have 10 Steves and we ask them to write an advanced algorithm. So they wouldn't do it. So what they say is, if you have 100 Steves, then you actually get the program written, which is not true, because none of them have this knowledge that is necessary. So you don't, whether you have one Steve or 100 Steves, it doesn't really make any difference. You need an engineer who knows how to write a computer program, and then you just need one to basically write the program. And this is precisely what we see in evolution. No matter how many mechanisms or material causes or influences of stars, because they speak in medieval terms about the influence of sky or celestial spheres, no matter what's happening from the bottom up, like putrefaction, all of these combined does not supply the thing that is needed, which is design, which is an intellect, because every new nature is like a new idea how to realize the phenomenon of life. You can realize it in so many ways, but in each case you have to invent, you have to answer specific questions. How the bird is supposed to fly. It needs new type of limbs, which in this case are wings. It needs new type of respiratory system, double lungs system in birds. You have pneumatic skeleton, empty bones that are lighter and stronger. So you see many changes that are rational responses to the requirements that this thing has to meet. So you need intelligence in order to invent new living being, no matter how many material causes you have, multiplying them. So in this sense, Aquinas would say that evolution has no sufficient cause or proportional cause to the effect that it is claimed to have achieved or achieving all the time.
So to clarify then, what Aquinas is talking about here, and again, you're basically representing what Aquinas taught centuries and centuries ago, but this is Aquinas speaking to these questions. This is what's sometimes known as the principle of sufficient reason. You can't have more in the effect, meaning the thing that was caused or produced, than you had in the cause. In a vulgar sense, and this applies to a couple of different principles, but you can't give what you don't have. And so Aquinas is saying, although he's not speaking specifically about biological macroevolution, of course, back in the 1200s, he's saying that we see effects or things that are caused all around us. And in no case is it possible that they could be caused by something with less perfection or less actuality in its nature than that effect, which is, as you say, a strange but completely fundamental principle of biological macroevolution. Simpler and less perfect things given a lot of time, and as the Thomistic evolutionists or theistic evolutionists would say, a whole conglomeration of multiple different kinds of cause, you could actually have a simpler thing eventually produce a more complex and more perfect thing. Aquinas would simply not agree with that conclusion.
Precisely because among this conglomerate of causes, there is not a single one that is capable of producing this kind of effect.
Yeah, you've just got 100 ignorant Steves, none of whom has any idea how to program a computer, and it doesn't matter if you give the 100 Steves a billion years, you're still not going to get your nice new algorithm. Okay, one other quick question just to clarify a term, because viewers might not be familiar. When you say a Thomist, or Thomism, or a Thomistic view, you're talking about that term comes from the name Thomas Aquinas. You're talking about someone who is an intellectual devotee or follower or admirer of St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay, great. So in the book, then you go into a second argument.
Oh yeah, the second argument is derived from basics of classical metaphysics. So you would say that every being, especially material being, has something what we call substance. So what it is, we can say that this thing is this thing, we give a name or definition, and then what it has. So some kind of features, characteristics. And these characteristics are called accidents, because those features are kind of superficial. That's why they are called accidents, because they can change. So for instance, you can have a cat that is white or black or brown or
long
maybe
fur, short fur. Yep.
Still you have cat. In each case you have cat that fulfills the idea of a cat, that realizes the idea of a cat in this particular specimen. But those characteristics, those features, the accidents may change. So the basic idea of evolutionary theory is that if you change the features, the accidents, long enough and accumulate the accidental changes over multiple generations over time, you will ultimately get a thing that belongs to a different nature. So let's say from this reptile, there will be a bird. And clearly, reptiles and birds are different natures, or apes and humans are different natures. So you will, by changing accidents, the characteristics, you will ultimately get something new, a new type of a being. And this is just not possible on Thomistic view, classical metaphysics, precisely because accidental change will only change accidents, the features. So you may have, in generation, you may get from white cat, you may get a black cat or a brown cat, or maybe, a mixture of colors in a cat, but you will never get a dog, even if you accumulate those features for infinite time. So basically, some Thomists would respond, wait, there are actually examples when by mixing things, so making accidental changes, you get new substance. For instance, if you mix water and salt, you will get a saline. So apparently accidental change, which is just combination of two things, you can accidentally drop salt in water, and so that's accidental change, and you get saline. Well, I would say this objection is based on a kind of common speech understanding of substance, whereas in metaphysics, substance is slightly different understood, because we understand in common language you use substance all the time. We say, well, this sugar is substance. We say, oh, this liquid is some substance that I don't know what it is.
There's a sticky substance on the table. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So, but this is a common use of the word, which in metaphysics has much more specific sense and more abstract sense. In metaphysics, substance is something that is well defined, that is whole, that is united, and that has, we call it entelechia. So it has the goal in itself. It's kind of wrapped around itself. So it's a being, it's a separate entity. You can clearly tell this is separate from anything else. This cat is separate from anything else. The other cats, the other animals, the ground, and anything else.
So you would be saying, just to make sure that we're tracking what Aquinas is saying here on substance versus accidents. Accidents are the features in the terms of biological macroevolution, accidents are the features of a given creature. They're, as you said, and they can change without the creature. So you can change the feature without changing the creature. Those are accidents, that's the technical term. Substance is the individual creature itself. This cat is a substance.
Or it contains the substantiality of this species.
The nature, right? It's an existing individual example of that nature, cat nature. That dog, an existing individual example of the dog nature. That parrot.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So accident and substance, all right.
Okay, so as I said, then what the critics would say that you can get new substance by making accidental changes, but they don't really understand substance correctly. And in this case of this objection, they confuse common use of substance with the metaphysical use. So sugar, water, salt are not substances strictly speaking. Right. Well, there are some compounds. Of course, metaphysical language is analogous, so you can pretty much anything you can call substance. Anything that you can kind of think of may be called substance in an analogous way. Right. But strictly speaking, substance is only God, because only God is totally separate, completely uniform, we could say, indivisible, individual,
completely self-contained. Yes, okay.
So that's the only true substance. Anything else that exists is a substance by analogy. And of course, there is a hierarchy of substances. So angels would be the highest substances. And so angel is a substance much more than human being. And then human beings are more than animals. Animals are more than plants and so on. So when you get down to this ladder of beings, you actually are speaking in substances in a very weak sense of the word. So on this level, you may have these things don't really constitute substances, so their mixtures are just mixtures of those compounds, and you may mix them and separate them. They are not united. So you see, that's the kind of mistake that is made.
So you're saying, in a sense, something like water and salt, atoms, molecules, chemical elements, simple compounds, are things which really exist, but they, in a real sense, exist kind of below the level of substance.
Yeah, we could say that real substances are built of these things, but they need substance, something like substantial form to keep them together, to give them this actuality of being a real substance. So so that would be so I think the argument stands no matter how long. And actually, look, biological experiments in laboratories confirm metaphysical principles, because you may take an animal and perform on it so many experiments by making genetic mutations, and your outcome is always either the same animal with some changes, like you can probably introduce a gene that will make a mouse to be fluorescent, so it will shine in darkness, because you introduced a gene that will produce this kind of protein in mice. So you can get the same animal with some features changed, or you can get a sick animal, or you can get a dead animal. So these are basically your three options. You get the same animal with some changes, you have a sick animal, like legless lizards, or you get dead animals, which is completely non-viable.
So essentially then what you're saying is you can change as many accidents or features of an animal as you wish, and all you've done is accumulate mutations in the same animal. So you had a regular mouse, now you have a fluorescent mouse. You had a regular lizard, now you have a legless lizard. But it's still a lizard, it's still a mouse.
And if the amount of changes you apply is so that matter of this organism is not proportional with the form anymore, then the form flies away. The compound matter form composite falls apart. That's why a lizard dies or the mouse dies, because matter has been changed too much to be compatible with the form. So this is precisely what you see. Either you apply accidental changes and you change accidents, or you kill the animal, basically. And so I would say that this is what Thomists should celebrate, that modern, biology confirms the principle of classical metaphysics, rather than imagine that if you apply so many changes, you will get a snake from a lizard or something like that.
Right. Yeah. You could imagine sort of in a comical way, two scientists in a laboratory trying to mutate a poor little lizard into a bird, and one of them's observing and the other one's tinkering with the genes, and the guy observing says, okay, well, one of his legs fell off, but it's still a lizard. Tinkers some more. Another leg fell off, but it's still a lizard. Tinkers some more. One of his eyeballs is gone now. It's still a lizard. So you have a legless, eyeless tail. You never get a bird. Eventually, with enough of those accumulated mutations or accidental changes, you just have a dead lizard. Well, now he's dead. He's still not a bird. Now he's just a dead lizard.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's I think it's a strong argument, and actually, this cuts to the bottom of metaphysics. If you believe in so-called natural transformation of species, so natural processes, material processes transforming one species into another, you have to deny the idea of species altogether. Right. You have just units, you have no substantial forms, you have no species, because units, if there are no species, they could be transformed, because that's just accidental difference, there is no substantial difference. So basically, if you believe in biological macroevolution, you cannot be a Thomist, you cannot believe in any kind of essentialism, because there are no essences on this view. It's
no essences or natures, yeah.
Natures. It's impossible to hold on to these two views.
So in that sense, if it was true that natural transformism were possible, where nature could just over time mutate one thing into another thing, then it doesn't even make sense to talk about cats or dogs or lizards or birds. In a sense, any living thing you look at is essentially the same. It's no longer what it was and not yet what it will be. Everything is just a dot on a transition.
And definition is totally imposed by us. So it's in each case it's a kind of logical definition. So you put a definition on this thing based on some features, but there is nothing like inherent nothing inherent to make the definition possible. Yeah.
Okay.
Another problem that actually stems from this one is that Thomas says that nothing in generation, nothing produces its own nature. And Thomas is very explicit that if a horse gives birth to another horse, the horse that is a parent is, and this is precisely the example of Thomas Aquinas, a horse. The parental horse does not produce the nature of the posterity of the horse, the baby horse, but it only passes on the nature it has, and in a way realizes it in this individual. Mm-hmm. So again, nothing can pass more than it has, and the horse has the nature that it received from its parent, so it does not produce the nature of horse universally speaking, but only the nature of a horse in this particular individual. Okay. This obviously excludes evolution on the same principle that we just spoken about, because if a lizard or any reptile can give birth to a lizard, producing just the nature of a lizard within the lizard species, we could say, obviously, in generation, it will never produce any other nature, because it just passes on what it has. So that's a limitation in generation. So again, you may probably change some accidents, some features, so you have a bigger or smaller horse, but you will not get anything else from horse. So that's just an offshoot of this first argument.
But that's an interesting point, because you're saying then essentially what Aquinas is recognizing. First of all, Aquinas very clearly believes, and not only believes, but defends the reality of the natures of things, because he believes that God gave them their natures. So a cat is a cat because God you used the word invented earlier. I think that's a helpful way to think. God invented cats. Yeah. They have certain essential features that differentiate them from dogs and goldfish and moose and parrots and and so because Aquinas sees very clearly and defends the reality of the natures of things, he just makes a common sense observation and saying there is nothing in the nature of a lizard that can give birth or give rise to a bird.
Even more strictly, there is nothing in the nature of lizard to produce a lizard as a universal, as a substantial form. It can only create a lizard reduced to this particular individual.
Yeah.
So it does not create its own species. It just passes on an individual form of this species.
So, Father, is that in a sense why when we talk about animals generating new members of their species, we actually call it reproduction? Like
Exactly.
reproduction species, they're just reproducing another living instance of their species. They're not creating the nature of lizard.
Yeah.
They're just reproducing another member of that. Okay, that's helpful to see. I think it's also it's helpful. It's very interesting to see how clearly Aquinas sees this reality, and how clearly he communicates this reality. He's, like you said, he's nuancing these points. He's making it very clear what can and cannot proceed from one type of species. Okay, great.
Yeah, so another argument would be about the idea of, like, if you want to explain material being on classical metaphysical terms, you need to give 4 causes of this being. So any material being would have 4 causes. This is quite abstract, but so I need to give a little bit of background. So the cause is something that causes something, right? So it is.
Can I ask you a question about this before you list them? When I was first studying philosophy, this at first was a confusing concept to me, until the professor said it in a certain way, which at least for me kind of helped me. Okay now. So if you look at a thing and pick a thing, we're talking about biological macroevolution and whether Aquinas thinks it's possible, whether he's compatible with it. So we'll talk about living organisms. So you look at a living organism, and you can ask, well, what caused it? You know, you drive outside of town, and there in a pasture, you see a herd of horses.
Yeah.
And you see a baby horse, a little foal running around. You say, well, what caused it?
Yeah.
Aristotle says that's a more complex question than you think.
Yeah.
Because you can ask what caused it in different senses.
Exactly.
And we need to answer that question in each of those different senses.
Yeah, so to use an even more simple example would be like a marble statue. So there is a material cause, so-called, and matter is a very abstract concept. This is something that has no qualification whatsoever. There is no, we can't say anything. But to simplify the thing, let's say that marble is matter, in this case designated matter, that is a material cause of this monument or statue. Then a form which comes with matter, so is adduced from matter, as it is said, is let's say a shape. To simplify a little bit, it's a shape or any quality of this marble. So its size, its color, its shape, everything of that kind is form. So this is a formal cause, we could say. Then you have the efficient cause, so something that makes this thing, and that would be a sculpture, typically. So he efficiently, using how do you call it?
A hammer and
a
chisel.
Yeah, he makes this statue, and then you have something like the final cause. So what is the final cause? It's something that attracts to the end. This thing is attracted to the end, and that's the idea. We could, using this picture, the idea that the sculptor has in his head. I'm gonna create this kind of statue. Let's say it's Napoleon, or maybe Michelangelo's Pieta in Rome. So I'm imagining this thing, and this is the final cause, because my thing is tending towards the goal that I have in my mind. That's the final cause of this particular being. So we have these 4 causes. Now, if you apply this scheme, this system to evolution, well, everything is supposed to change into something else. So formal cause is actually, we could say, non-existent, in this sense that if a lizard is to become a snake, and then any reptile some reptile is to become a bird. So in this chain of progression of those life forms, you actually see that the form, so like what is formal cause doing? It's not establishing a species. It's not, so it's in a way reduced up to the final cause, because there is some kind of teleology in this process, at least on theistic account, or if we are talking about theistic evolution, then we believe that this is somehow guided by God. So in fact, this formal cause that is supposed to make this thing what it is, actually makes this thing something else in order to become something else, in order to become something else, and in order to go to, I don't know, human being and beyond. So in a way, we can say that the formal cause is reduced up to the final cause. So ultimately, they two blend, and they become like one final cause. And on the other hand, you have the question about the efficient cause, like what causes the process. On a classic account, the cause of species is divine mind. This is what produces species. This is what God educes those forms from matter using his power, but also the intellect, because you need to, as we said, you need to have an idea how to create a species. Whereas on evolutionary account, these are material processes that are supposed to produce those species. Therefore, you reduce the efficient cause to material cause, because it's matter changing under the form, or those rather, there are no real forms, but there is matter kind of tending to produce these different types of animals. So effectively, you reduce the efficient cause to material cause, and you are left with just two causes instead of four, which obviously is unacceptable on Aristotelian Thomistic account. So,
I'm going to go back to the pietà example for a minute, because like you said, it's a much simpler, I think we can get a better grip on it. And then I like how you translate that into this question of Thomism and evolution. If you look at a given thing by way of the lens of Aristotle's four causes, each of those causes answers a specific question about the reality of that thing. So you look at the Pietà at St. Peter's in Rome, this beautiful sculpture of the Blessed Mother holding her crucified son, and you say, well, what is it made of? It could be wood, it could be steel, it could be plaster, the answer to that question is the material cause. It's made of marble, okay? Yeah. Efficient cause answers the question, who or what made it? In this case, the great medieval sculptor Michelangelo. So he answers the question, who or what made it? What is it exactly? What is it? It's the Blessed Mother holding her crucified son. And so he put that image, Michelangelo, the efficient cause, put that image or that form into the material cause, the marble, and then we recognize it because he's a good sculptor. If I tried to sculpt it, we may not be able to answer the question of formal cause. I don't know, I have no idea what that is. And then the final cause is why? Why? And of course, if it's something that a human being or an intelligence did, that's a very interesting question. Why? There may be many reasons. Well, he got paid handsomely to create that beautiful sculpture. It's a devotional image. He wanted to help people contemplate the Passion of Christ and the sorrow of Mary. But there's a reason, and you use the word end, which of course is a philosophical term for the purpose or the goal that Michelangelo had in mind when he said he picked up that chisel and that hammer. So what you're saying then is when we ask those four questions on the evolutionary account, we can get an answer to especially theistic evolution, because it allows that there's some intentionality in the process. So there is a goal, because God is involved somehow in the background at a distance. But we can answer the material question, well, what is this organism made of? Well, take it into the lab and analyze it, and there's DNA, and there's chemical compounds and hormones, and et cetera. And we can answer the final, but the final answer for everything is, well, it's a transition on its way to whatever God wants it to become, ultimately by way of this evolutionary process. But the formal cause, asking what is it, doesn't work on an evolutionary conception, because, as you pointed out so well, in a sense, anything we look at, any organism we look at, never is anything, properly speaking. It's always becoming, but it never becomes. Yeah. It never stops. It never arrives. Yeah. And so there's no form, and we can never answer the question, what is it? And then the efficient cause of, well, who or what no, that's just the same question as the material cause. The matter is doing the making and the becoming. So am I understanding that kind of? Okay, good.
Yeah, that's correct understanding. And then the fifth argument by Aquinas is comes from the fact that Aquinas says that God created the universe in such a way and in order to reflect his power, wisdom, and greatness. And he could have created one being that would reflect his goodness and power, but in order to reflect more of his goodness and power, he created many and different beings. So the consequence of having different beings, a variety of beings, is that they are not equal. Because if you have variety, you will have some kind of hierarchy. So some things are more perfect than others. Therefore, this hierarchy of beings is actually intended by God. This is by design. He wants things to be different. He doesn't want everything to be on top of perfection. He wants in a positive way beings to be less or more perfect. And you see it everywhere. You see all kinds of organisms. You see perfection among humans and among animals, and everywhere there are different levels of perfection. So on evolutionary account, it seems like all of this is wasted, because if evolution was working efficiently, all imperfect would disappear and we would have just the most perfect beings, because evolution tends towards greater perfection, more complexity. So after all, you would get just the most complex beings. Well, surely we still see bacteria and other animals and plants. So we see those different levels, but that's just a byproduct of evolution. It's not intended by God. If evolution was really efficiently working, you wouldn't have this variety, and the varieties there because it just happens to be. It's not intended by God. So that's a completely different view. I would say that the so-called scala naturae, so the scale of nature where you have hierarchy of beings, is not compatible. And this is a common view among medieval scholars, including Aquinas. I don't think you can harmonize it with the idea that all beings go up and up on this scale. Right. So this is this idea of Aquinas, who says that God creates different things to reveal his greatness, and the variety of things is positively intended by God, does not square with the evolutionary account of life.
It is almost obviously incompatible with evolutionary. So on an evolutionary conception of things then, even theistic evolution, you would essentially say all of the less perfect creatures, and we're again talking about biological macroevolution, all of the less perfect creatures, the single-celled organisms, the very simple life forms, those which don't have the ability to move about in their environment, all of those are almost kind of like what's been left behind by an imperfect evolutionary process. They're not good in themselves, which of course also runs contrary to the Genesis account, whereas God creates things intentionally according to their kinds on this scala natura, or the hierarchy of being. He says of everything at every step, it's good. He looked at it as good. This is what I intended it to be. And so Aquinas is saying God does this intentionally. He gives each of these things at every level of this great scale of nature, this hierarchy of being, its nature as a particular manifestation of his power and his wisdom and his greatness. And so anything on the Thomistic conception, which is the classical Catholic understanding, anything you look at, any organism you look at, expresses the goodness and the power and the greatness of God in its own particular way, as God intended. The same God who can create the highest of the angels, the seraphim, can create a paramecium or an amoeba, and can create a mouse and a man and a moose, and then even to step outside of biological macroevolution for a moment, the stars, the planets, the galaxies, all of them unique and different. If you think of the totality of beings which exist, both living and non-living, things which exist in the universe, it's staggering the incalculable number of ways that God intentionally made his goodness manifest. And then small wonder when St. Paul in Romans chapter 1 looks at the universe and says, come on, If you're at all open-minded and you look at the stunning diversity and glory of creation, you know God exists.
Yeah.
He's made himself very, very apparent. Okay. So good. So those are the 5 arguments that you lay out in support of your view that St. Thomas Aquinas' Thomistic thought is not, in fact, at all compatible with evolutionary theory. But of course, theistic evolutionists disagree and say, absolutely, he is. In fact, some of them would even say, you could call us Thomistic evolutionists because we employ the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas in support of our theistic evolution. One of the arguments I've heard from theistic evolutionists trying to incorporate Aquinas into their thinking is the idea that we see that there's chance, randomness, fortune, and Aquinas acknowledged that there are chance events. And so the theistic evolutionist says, so God uses chance to create. God uses chance to design, or he designs using chance, and all chance events ultimately fall under divine providence. So obviously, it's fine if chance is just moving creatures along up the hierarchy of being.
Yeah. Obviously, this is a popular argument provided even by the International Theological Commission, this document, Communion and Stewardship. So the mistake that they make here is they do not distinguish between the order of creation and the order of providence, which is so clear in Aquinas, who obviously draws on Catholic tradition and the Bible itself, which says that God created within some time and then he finished his creation and then he continues to take care of the universe, but in a different mode, we could say. So the acts of creation are always direct and there cannot be intermediate causes. Whereas in the work of providence, God, he sees all things, all details, everything. So even if something happens by chance on our account, by our standards, God sees it, so it does not fall out of divine plan. But this is the order of providence, the gubernatio rerum, so-called, so the governing of things that God provides on natural level, so that there is something like natural providence, and we can speak about supernatural providence when God intervenes in the natural order by miracles and other things like this. But the order of creation has no chance events. So this is all planned. The new form has to come directly from divine mind. So I would say that's the basic problem with this argument.
Okay, so what we're pointing out here is that in the order of creation, there are no chance events. Creation is God bringing into existence all the things which exist. The order of creation is speaking again about origins. Yeah. Once he has intentionally and directly brought into being, brought into existence all the things which exist according to their kinds, then he provides for what he has brought into existence, first of all by holding it in existence, and then presiding over all the different actions and interactions and change and motion of things till the end, which would at that point include, sure, there's chance events after things, but that's not how things originate. That's how they carry. Okay, that's good. So, Father, another objection I've heard from theistic evolutionists, they say that, well, if God created things directly, then he's denying secondary causes, the things which he created, the dignity of cooperating, participating in his plan and in his work. And so they say, well, it's obviously, it's a greater dignity of creatures as secondary causes to participate with God in creating new things and new natures and new creatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's again an argument that stems from some kind of confusion. So yes, indeed, but what Thomas says is actually that direct creation reveals more of divine power than using secondary causes. Precisely because, well, for one, you can't have secondary causes in creative act because in creation, something is produced out of nothing. So in the first creation of the universe, obviously all matter, energy, space is created out of nothing. But in a so-called secondary creation, when God creates species, a species is produced from matter that had been already created, but new substantial form is adduced from this matter, which means the new substantial form is created out of nothing and adduced or introduced into this matter. So in each case, you have something out of nothing, which can be done only by God. So no creature can serve as secondary cause for the act of creation. And that's a common theme among not just Thomas Aquinas and medieval theologians, but throughout church history. So God cannot endow creatures with the power of creation, not because he has no such power, but because creation is unable to do it. We can explain it by saying, for instance, okay, can God use, let's say, a saw to cut wood? Yes, he can use an instrumental cause, a saw to cut wood. But can God use a plastic knife to cut rock? Well, plastic knife will definitely break when you start pushing against rock. So, properly speaking, even God cannot do this, not because he lacks power, but because the tool is inapt for this task. Now, God can easily transcend the inability of the secondary cause to produce the effect. For example, by making plastic knife that strong that it will cut through rock and applying enough power to cut through the rock. But then we wouldn't say that he uses this plastic knife as a secondary cause. We could say that God acts beyond or regardless of this secondary cause, right? So that's why creation is like a plastic knife to cut rocks. God can do it regardless of secondary causes. That's why he doesn't use them in creation, because no being can create being. So the essence, the existence of a thing, that's the problem here. So yeah, so again, there is some confusion between providence, where God normally uses secondary causes, including the saints who intercede for us, and all kinds of material causes. Even this table is used, we could say, by God to provide for us some kind of support, whatever. So this is the type of activity that we see in God all the time, but in creation, no secondary causes are involved.
So it's not as though those poor secondary causes have nothing to do and nothing to contribute because they don't get to create.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Another objection that another argument I've heard from theistic evolutionists is, well, listen, it's far more impressive. It requires far more power and wisdom for God to create things at a distance through intermediary causes than to just directly create. And they're acknowledging God's omnipotent, he can just create something directly, but that's not how he did it, because it's even more impressive and wonderful and manifests his power and wisdom that he did it from a distance through all these intermediary causes.
This is interesting because actually this argument was proposed by the Enlightenment deists. So they would say exactly the same thing, that it's more, God reveals more of his contrivance, wisdom, power. Great architect reveals more when he uses causes to create causes. So he's the cause of causes, as they said, or ens entium. So Erasmus Darwin, for example, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, makes this argument in his book Zoonomia. Also, Robert Chambers, Charles Darwin himself has this kind of fragment in his work that he kind of associates with this kind of view. I don't think it's a Thomistic view. I think it's deistic, or the view that comes from Enlightenment and then positivism. In fact, what Thomas says is that God reveals his power. His power is revealed in the utmost sense. So he reveals his power in the act of creation. This is what is the biggest revelation of his power. And obviously, by using secondary causes, he reveals his wisdom in the order of providence, because he sets up all the causes, secondary causes, in such a way that they work together, and the fact that the things achieve their goals. That's the argument for ex gubernatio rerum. So he governs over the things, but again, the power of God is revealed in the act of creation, because in creation something nothing is transformed into something. So there is a production of something out of nothing, and the distance between nothing and something is infinite. Therefore, you need infinite power in order to come from nothing to something. And this is most clearly seen in the first creation, the creation of the universe out of nothing, so matter, space, energy, time, everything out of nothing. But then in creation of each creature, like every species, you also see transition, in a way, transition from nothing to something, because God uses the previously created matter to adduce from it a new form, new substantial form of a being, but this new substantial form is something entirely new. So even in so-called secondary creation, you still have something produced out of nothing. And this can be done only by God, because only He has infinite power. So that's why it's not true that for Aquinas, so pretty much they propose the opposite direction, opposite thinking than Aquinas presents in his works.
Excellent. Another one that you hear from theistic evolutionists, they kind of riff off of the idea of creatio continua, the continuous creation. They say, well, listen, God is continually creating everything because He holds everything in existence. He keeps giving being, giving existence to everything which exists, which means that God is continually creating, and that's basically a description of evolution. He's just continuing to create things all the time through natural causes.
So that would be theistic evolution. That is a natural process that lasts throughout the universe, and therefore, because God continually creates things, so this is perfectly compatible with theistic evolution, except that Thomas Aquinas never uses the term creatio continua, continuous creation. And that's a very actually marginal idea in Catholic theology. The classic concept, and the one that Aquinas uses, is the conservatio rerum in esse, which means that he preserves things in existence. And preservation of things in existence is quite a different concept of constantly creating new things, new entities. So preservation of things means that God created things and keeps them in existence, because if He withdrew, everything would just disappear. It would turn into non-existence. So He has to maintain things in existence. But how He does it? He doesn't maintain the compound of form and matter. So every individual being can be destroyed and can fall apart and die, and we see it in nature that things just change and they are destroyed and they go to waste and they dissolve and so on, which means that God does not maintain specific natures or entities in existence. He maintains them on a very basic level, just the act of essence, just the act of existence. That's what he provides continually, which means that the idea of creative universe, something being constantly produced, is completely incompatible with Aquinas' view of preservation of things in existence.
Okay, that's a good clarification. It's a good distinction to kind of wrap our minds around. So obviously, theistic evolution is by far the more mainstream opinion in Catholic circles, but we've talked about young Earth creationism, kind of defined it and explained it and addressed it a little bit. I think it'd be good to give a little bit of a study of Aquinas and young Earth creationism. The last argument you hear from theistic evolution that we'll address here, and there's other ones, of course, but these are kind of the main ones, is just the idea, listen, if you could build a time machine and go grab Thomas Aquinas from the 13th century and bring him here to the 21st century and then just lay out for him the glory of modern science and all of our discoveries and all of our knowledge, he would accept modern science and he would become a theistic evolutionist. He would be convinced just like we are, and he would join our team.
Yeah, I doubt that, because again, this is another confusion. Like, scientific concepts change, the concepts of nature change, but theological beliefs do not change due to discoveries of science. Science had discovered long ago that dead people don't come to life by themselves. Even so, we believe in the resurrection, and scientific progress provides more reasons why dead people do not come to life by themselves. So, and we still believe in the resurrection. The science does not affect our belief. And it's the same thing with the creation of species and the universe and the human being that Thomas teaches, and he teaches it as a theological truth that he derives from the book of Genesis. So he teaches about the origins of the universe, the origin of species, when he comments on the book of Genesis. So this is the revealed truth. So I don't think he would modify his theological views. He would definitely modify things like the belief in spontaneous generation. So the idea that if you have rotting meat, then some bugs will just spontaneously emerge from this meat because the sun, heat, water, whatever, moisture is there. So putrefaction produces living beings. That was the common idea among not only medieval scholars, but ancient scholars. And actually, it lasted until the 19th century when Louis Pasteur kind of put the end to this idea. But basically, that would be one example of a thing that Thomas would part with. But that's science of his days. So he would modify his scientific views, but not his theological views. So therefore, I don't think that there is a reason to say that he would become a theistic evolutionist. I would claim that he would rather be a progressive creation. He would join the camp of progressive creation.
I agree. I agree. I would join that team with him. So let's take a look for a couple minutes at Aquinas and young Earth creationism. Having studied Aquinas now for many, many years, and also you're familiar with young Earth creationists and kind of where their ideas come from. Is Aquinas compatible with young Earth creationism, or maybe on some points and not others? And what do you think that relationship would be?
Yeah, so this is an argument sometimes made by young Earth creationists that Aquinas and all church fathers were young earthers. Well, I would say that Aquinas actually shares the mainstream concept of how to understand the day of creation. So the mainstream concept among church fathers would be that the day of creation is a prefiguration of our day. So the week of creation is like a prefiguration of our week. So we can say that God created in such a way that we see a structure of a week in his divine work, which then we impose on our understanding of time, and we divide time into 7 days and 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. So that would be the mainstream idea among church fathers that Thomas Aquinas adopts, which basically leaves the day of creation that God performed open to different interpretations. But there is another interesting point on the idea of the age of the universe in Aquinas. So in one place, Aquinas says that ancient cosmologists, philosophers of nature, astronomers, claimed that, following Aristotle, that the heavens are immutable, they do not move. But then Ptolemy comes and he discovers the movement of heavens. And according to Ptolemy, the heaven moves 1 degree per 100 years, which would mean that it accomplishes its entire movement within 36,000 years.
So a full rotation of 360 degrees at 100 years per degree, 36,000
years.
Okay.
And Thomas says, therefore, some philosophers said that the end of the universe will happen when the heavens accomplishes its movement. And he says that, well, I don't think this is the case. For one, because you cannot predict the end of the universe, and secondly, because I do not think that the universe would last that long, which means 36,000 years. So we see that definitely Aquinas has a kind of idea of short time of the universe, less than 36,000 years for sure, but that would be the place where he would say, well, but the Bible teaches that we have 4,000 years of history before Christ, therefore this is 5,000 years today. If he believed that this is revealed, or that this is important, or that this is actually what the Bible teaches, he would probably insert it in this place. But moreover, he rejects the idea that is present among some church fathers and ancient writers. We call it creation week pattern. So, for example, St. Irenaeus would say that each day of creation is 1,000 years. So, therefore, because God created the universe in 6 days, the history of the universe will cover 6,000 years. So, when 6,000 years is fulfilled, the universe will end, the world will end. And this is where you get all these fears in medieval Europe about the end of the universe in the 1500s, then in 1600s, because this was roughly 6,000 years if you calculate it from, according to biblical records, to the origin of the universe. But what Thomas says, he actually explicitly rejects this idea. He calls it an opinion of ancient fathers, of ancient doctors, but he doesn't share this opinion, which means that definitely he doesn't share the creation week pattern. Again, we see that he's not committed to 6 or 4,000 years before Christ. So that's interesting. But what we additionally get from these quotes is that he clearly believes that science can modify our views about the heavens, how the universe works, what are the relative positions of planets, and the age. So this is a scientific concept, the age of the universe. Moreover, he says that in one place he actually says that today we explain heavens by referring to cycles and epicycles. So he speaks about the Ptolemaic model of the planetary system. Mm-hmm. But he says, but it is not. He says that it is possible that in the future someone will come with another explanation that will explain the phenomena, the appearances of heaven even better. So he, in a way,
bit of a prophet.
Yeah, he anticipates the Copernican revolution, transition from geocentrism to heliocentrism, which basically tells you that he would not have a problem with heliocentrism and Copernican system, because this is precisely what he says. If someone comes up with a theory that explains the appearances, what we see, better than this Ptolemaic system, then let it be. So, yeah, so Thomas clearly see even though he has no concept of modern science as, in our current sense, he clearly see the division between studying of nature and what our study of nature can modify, what our observation of sky or animals can change in our thinking, and the tenets of faith or sane philosophy, so-called healthy philosophy, Aristotelian philosophy that doesn't change, because these are things that were revealed, the tenets of faith. So yeah, I don't think that there is an argument for young Earth from Aquinas. He doesn't commit to any age of the universe. Obviously, he has no idea of billions of years, but at the same time, arguing that Aquinas was a young earther is not accurate.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. We've covered a lot of ground. It's definitely beneficial to think carefully about St. Thomas Aquinas, who is, again, such a foundational thinker for Catholics and really kind of a paradigm thinker for how we understand our faith philosophically and theologically. So to make clear what he did and did not believe, and how that would or would not be compatible with the various theories on offer, I think is a helpful enterprise. So thank you very much, Father Michael Chaberek, for being part of this and contributing your knowledge of Aquinas to this consideration. We have one more conversation left. I'm very much looking forward to it. So hopefully folks will join us for that one as well.
Thank you.
For a more in-depth look at all these fascinating topics, pick up a copy of Father Chaberek's excellent book, Creation or Evolution, A Catholic Dilemma, now available in a brand new English translation. The link to order your copy from Amazon or Barnes & Noble is in the show notes below.